Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. As always, I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Hello, America. Welcome to episode 11. Thanks for coming back, and thanks for sticking with me. So today, we're going to talk about a thing that I have been seeing on the socials lately. Not lately. It's ever since I've been on the socials, really. But racism, the re-emergence of racism. And it's not that racism was ever gone, really. But there is a re-emergence of it. And I mean real hate-filled racism. Jokes, whatever you think about racist jokes, they're off-color and tasteless and whatever. But I mean, there's some real hate being thrown around out there these days. And it's largely due to the platforms, I'm sure. But anyway, it's complex. There's history and all that contribute. But we have to, yes, you do have to acknowledge that it's out there. Racism is out there. But then you have to look at what things that are exacerbating that here in the modern day. I think politics and hyperbole for the extremist positions on either left or right, all these activists who lack an ability to be objective or just looking to inflame, already tense issues. So I want to go back to 2008, the election of Barack Obama. That was sold by the mainstream media as being the beginning of the post-racial society. He was the post-racial president. And the implications of that was that because we've elected a black president, that racism was now going to be over, all but over. Excuse me. I think the reality of that is not what happened at all. In my opinion, I think racial tensions got worse under Obama because he started out. He was constantly touted as being very pragmatic. And I just don't think that's the case, but he started out very smooth and we're all going to work together. But that didn't last long at all. He was one of the most polarizing presidents never to have been seated. And not only because he didn't stick to that we're all one team sort of mantra, but unmet expectations. What did Obama do for the black community? I think the general consensus among the black population was that everything's going to get better. We're suddenly going to be, there's not going to be any more ghettos. There's going to, whatever their version of equality in the marketplace or whatever. And nothing ever happened. He didn't even address criminal justice reform. So the socioeconomic disparities persisted. He didn't fix anything. The economy was garbage. He didn't do anything great and awesome. And then so and that, I think that, now I can't speak for white people, let alone black people, but I think the masses understood that, okay, he's just a politician, and that's it. He just does what politicians do. He bought a compound on Martha's Vineyard, and he's a millionaire, and that's it. And during that time, there was some very, very, very high-profile sort of issues. If you guys remember the Trayvon Martin incident, where I forget the guy's name, George something, ended up killing Trayvon Martin in a very ambiguous sort of situation. And Obama came out and said, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. So that statement alone just threw fuel onto the fire. And then you had, not as a direct result, but definitely contributing to. And then, if you guys remember the Ferguson riots, that the Democrats, they just sort of like, yeah, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. All that highlighted sort of still systemic issues, and there was a national outrage and all kinds of things, and race was a big topic. And this was with the post-racial president. Obama didn't do, like I said, he didn't address criminal justice. He didn't address education. He didn't address economics in any meaningful way. So any disparities that existed before him, they existed with him and after him. So that post-racial label was definitely premature. I mean, the guy got a Nobel Peace Prize before he was ever even in office. So the post-racial label was certainly premature. Never mind the Peace Prize. The only president ever to drone an American citizen. I think he just stoked racism more than helped to ease the inflammatory hyperbole and rhetoric. And it's kind of unrealistic that one man could do such a thing anyway, I think. And it's not giving him any credit. It's saying one man is not going to solve centuries of embedded, ingrained racism or anger about, slavery and things like that. During his time, now keep in mind, guys, this is not a podcast. This is not an episode just to bash Obama. I'm gonna get on here in a minute. But during his term or his terms, you had the activist groups that come to prominence. Black Lives Matter, which may very well have started out as a grassroots movement that had legitimate grievances, but immediately turned into a paid agitation group. The founders of Black Lives Matter grifted the American black population and liberal population. And now I want to say the Black Lives Matter founder, I don't know, bought multi-million-dollar homes and all these kinds of things. So it was no longer grassroots pretty quick into it. But their whole point was to oppose police violence and systemic racism and to advocate for black communities. But if you look around, if you do the research, what did they do for any black communities? They haven't done anything for any Atlanta black communities. What did they do for any black communities? They were very polarizing. They had a lot of loud talk, but what did they do? And then you had like more militant, like the new Black Panther Party, who I think they were largely just a visual, something to be scary. They didn't do anything at all. Famously, they was doing a sort of a march, and one of the guys carrying a AR-15, 22 caliber AR-15, had like the rifle was on so the bolt was locked open, his finger was all kind of unsafe weapon handling stuff. It was pretty funny, but I don't think that the new Black Panther Party has contributed. They contributed to hyperbole and racism and that sort of thing, but I don't think they did anything to help the community. I don't know. I don't keep up with the new Black Panther Party. They may be out there doing great things, but I don't know that for sure. But just on that note, there is a guy out there, Maj Toure, who runs an organization called the Solutionaries. He's out there doing things, and he has a large following, and he has tangible effects on the black community. I haven't seen any tangible effects from BLM or the new Black Panther Party. Now, I'm not just bashing on blacks. What about these white reactionary groups, these sort of remnants of KKK and what during that time, during the Obama time, that it was labeled alt-right. Everything that was white racism was labeled alt-right. And the general public, and this was a strategy, by the way. The Democrats, and we'll get to their strategy here in a little bit, but anything that was conservative was kind of labeled as alt-right. And then there's legitimate white nationalist extremists out there. There are. Now, arguably, they have no teeth. Arguably, they reached their peak in the 80s, 70s and 80s. I can remember in the very early 90s, the 82nd Airborne Division, when I went to the 82nd Airborne Division, they were doing tattoo checks. And they weren't what they were looking for was white supremacy associated tattoos. Now, I got a lot of tattoos. I don't have any white supremacy tattoos, but I distinctly remember standing butt naked in front of a staff sergeant who went over every tattoo on my body. So, but my point to that is that the white supremacy, all those groups, they don't have any teeth anymore. There might be little pockets out there. I don't even think they're physically out there doing anything, and they're certainly not doing anything for their community. And they're certainly not doing anything to raise a new generation of well-rounded and educated children. At any rate, and then you had, like the Proud Boys. They were kind of labeled as a white nationalist faction, and they were in some of these counter protests as a direct result of BLM stuff. So, and then what you saw, and this is arguable. I mean, this is debatable. But some of these white nationalist protests that you saw out there, they were manufactured. Much like BLM, I think, was pretty much manufactured. They were just less controlled. I strongly believe that federal agencies manufactured some of these to put them in there to keep the flames going, honestly. And you say, Edgar, what did they achieve from that? Well, the Obama era was a very political. Everything was a political strategy. Everything was a political strategy. And I think that was what they got from that, was keeping the divide. I think the general American public, white, black, or otherwise, I think if you ask them about, hey, what does big government, does media benefit from having a divided population? And I think everybody, generally speaking, who has a little bit of independent thought will say, well, yes, they did. That is beneficial to them, especially in a political context of blue versus red. So most of these groups that emerged during that time, and then you had the Portland, Oregon, the no-go zones and things like that. None of that stuff is acceptable. It's madness, and it wasn't legit protest. There may have been some legitimate grievances, but destroying entire city blocks, destroying private property, destroying anything and everything is not a legitimate form of protest. Oh, what about the Tea Party, Edgar? Well, that's apples and oranges, different times, and we can discuss that. But just destroying things for the sake of destroying them is not legitimate protest. And then what you see, which is a continuance of that stuff, is social media, is the little echo chambers within social media. So here's what I do, and here's my strategy. I follow extremists on both ends, on both sides of the spectrum, to see what kind of madness they're putting out. And I can tell you that following both sides, if you apply consistent standards to both sides and take out the keywords, you wouldn't know one side from the other. They're both vile. They're both hate-filled, and they both spew opinion as if it were fact, and they both attempt to demonize non-believers. Non-believers. Social media is a tool, much like a gun, and it's only as good or as bad as those who wield it. It just happens to be an excellent platform to spread whatever your message is. So let's get back on the white nationalist or racial groups, the extremist groups. I alluded to this a minute ago. So there's a misassociation that everything that is conservative, political conservatism, is somehow racist or nationalist. And that's just not the reality. White supremacy groups like the KKK or whatever alt-right things, all that stuff certainly predates Donald Trump. And Donald Trump certainly has never been a part of that. If you look at the history of Donald Trump and the physically, financially, what he's done for the black community, objectively, if you look at that objectively, you can't say that Donald Trump's a racist, and you just can't clump him in with that crew. You can't do it. But it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, conservatism in general. It's easy to do that because some of these organizations claim Christianity, but they're not accepted by the broader Christian community at all. They claim they have some traditional family values, but they absolutely do not. So conservatism isn't automatically. What is conservatism? The reality is, and what it's meant to be, and it's not even practiced in actual politics, is limited government and free markets. That's family values, sort of Christian family values, limited government, free markets. The Congress right now happens to be full of a bunch of just opportunists, but that's what conservatism is. It has nothing to do with any legacy of racism or slavery or anything like that. So, like I said, Trump's rhetoric, he's got big rhetoric, man. He does talk big, a lot of bravado, a lot of America first and all that stuff. But that's divisive to some people out there, to half the population. But it's definitely not racism. It's definitely not racism. And certainly not white supremacy. And a lot of people, they conflate because of the immigration piece, right? They're doing a lot of they're closing the borders down, not closing them down. They're tightening the borders up, right? People think because brown people are coming from South America and Latin America that it's racism to have some accountability, and I don't agree with that at all. Now, if you want to talk about what's going on right now, literally, their due process, yeah, that phrase has been getting thrown around a lot, due process, and I believe that there are some shortcomings there as far as how they're deporting people, but I don't think yet. Everybody says, "Oh, he's deporting American citizens." I don't think that's a provable fact. I don't think that's a provable fact. But that's what they associate with racism, because foreigners largely are Hispanic or Latino. Yep. And why don't they deport, I don't know, German people? Well, Western Europe, one, they live in civilized societies. They're not rushing to come live in America. And if they are, they do it the correct way. They follow procedure. However bureaucratic and red taped up that procedure is, they follow it. So what Donald Trump does, by and large, is not racist at all. It might be distasteful to immigrants. It's definitely distasteful to anybody who's liberal, but it's not racist. The propaganda and the hyperbole that fuel the racist inferno from the left it's problematic because the progressive left, and if the shoe fits, wear it. If it don't. But, and I'm speaking in with some blanket statements here. There's obviously nuance, but generally speaking, the left views America as inherently racist. We were born racist, and if you're white, you are racist whether you believe it or not. And they emphasize systemic issues all the time, downplaying or ignoring individual responsibility and individual agency. So that's a problem from the left, right? And then the other problem is how they do it. Everything that you hear from a progressive or liberal news outlet or liberal people on the streets or videos you see all over the social medias is it's all emotionally charged. It's all emotional. Everybody's screaming and yelling or crying, and it's selective outrage. Yeah, and I've said this plenty of times before. You can't bemoan a cop shooting a kid without bemoaning the hundreds of deaths every weekend in major urban areas, i.e. Chicago, uh, i.e. where was another one? I think Memphis has got it right now is like one of these high crime rates, or down in Louisiana, Biloxi or somewhere down there has got very high crime rates. My point is this. They don't objectively look at all the crime. They look at the ones that serve a purpose to fuel further racism, because racism is a political strategy. And then from the right, what do you get from the right? I'm not saying there aren't racists out there. There are on both sides of the spectrum. But what the conservative media does sometimes is that they minimize legitimate racial grievances, which further exacerbates the left getting upset that they're trying to marginalize or minimalize what's going on. And then the right conservative media, they want to frame it as being overblown or politically motivated. Yes, I believe there's a lot of political motivation, but there are racists out there. And when you call them out, it needs to be determined that it's whether or not it's legitimate. And as found legitimate, it needs to be dealt with legitimately. There's a problem with the metaphor of the boy who cried wolf. And that's why the left is so flawed in this strategy of claiming racism all the time, because it gives that the boy who cried wolf effect to where now when it's really going on and there's really a problem, that nobody wants to listen. And then what is the right then, the conservative right? You've heard the phrase reverse racism. I don't know who coined that phrase, but it's ridiculous and it's a political construct. There's no such thing as a reverse racism. You are either a racist or you are not. Black, white, brown, yellow, whatever. There is no reverse racism. What would that mean? That would mean you love a particular race so much. You love all races, but you love a particular race the most, I guess. I don't know what reverse racism means. It's ridiculous. You're either racist or you're not. And then there's white genocide. Conservatives like to throw that around as well. Now, I can tell you right now, there is no white genocide. There is legitimately in South Africa white genocide going on as a direct result of decades of black genocide. And I'm not excusing it, and it's bad and it's wrong on both sides. But kind of like the boy who cried wolf, if you claim racism for everything, it minimizes the effects of what you're saying. If you claim white genocide in a first world country in America, you're not getting the effect that you think you are. Now, there is a political strategy, the replacement theory, and that's a whole other thing that can be talked about. I think that is a thing. I don't think it's white genocide. I think the Democrats are certainly trying to import brown voters to lock in their votes, not because they love brown people, not because they care, because they're trying to import voters. But that's not white genocide, folks. And to say it is just that's stoking the flames. So all these things, they have a platform on social media. And all this sensationalism over things that aren't exactly true, it shows up in the algorithm. You know what I mean? If you follow politics, you're going to get shit like that in your on your stream there. And all it does is amplify extreme voices. But I don't even know, like, the extremes on either side are still a very small percentage of the vast population. And that's the vast white, black, brown population. The extremists are out there talking the loudest and getting the most airtime on social media. And then average people look at the social media and they think that that's what's going on in America because of the loudest voices. And it's not. Go outside in your average town in America, walk to the grocery store, look around you, walk downtown, go out to eat. You don't see the things that you see on social media. So, yeah, like I said, it's a tool. It's only as good as bad as those who wield it. The loudest voices wield it pretty well, and therefore they show up on your feed. And all those loud voices, all they do is drown out any nuance and any objective perspectives. And that's what their goal is. They yell the loudest so that their opinion is the one that's heard. And they're depending on people who can't think critically or think for themselves or can't be objective. They're depending on those people. And the loudest voices from either side of the spectrum, they all virtue signal, right? That's not just the thing that the left does, by the way. The right does that as well. Virtue signaling is no good. That doesn't mean because you wear a t-shirt or you do a thing, that doesn't mean that you're dedicated to anything. It doesn't mean you have genuine concern or care for any platform, left or right. People do that stuff, and sadly, for social media to try to get followers, to try to get clicks. Now, I personally don't know how people make money on the internet. I don't make any money on the internet at all. I'm happy to have the few thousand people listening to me that do. I'm quite happy with that. But these people who know how to take advantage of the social media system, they're doing it, and they can seem like that they are the norm when they are not. Madness, propaganda, hyperbole, that stuff's madness. And it's gotta be, at some point we gotta cycle back to some rational discourse. So acknowledging extreme behavior on both sides. So for the general black population to acknowledge that there are black groups out there that are confrontational, that are out there trying to publicly shame and physically assault and destroy things, to claim that that's justified when it's not, and then not to acknowledge the boundaries of behavior, that's no good. And that in itself creates or exacerbates racism from a white perspective. And when you're when you hold extreme opinions and you spew loudly extreme opinions, you're alienating potential allies, moderate people who behave rationally, who think rationally, and would otherwise be an ally for you. They don't want to touch any extremism. They don't want to touch anything that's going to create violence or things like that, or that's going to keyhole them into or stereotype them in some way. Moderate people, and I'm reminded of the Bible verse. and I'm not quoting it word for word, but it's something to because you're neither hot or cold, I spit you out of my mouth. I tell you what, these days we need a little bit of lukewarm in discourse. In discourse, you can present extreme ideas in a very calm way, and you can build a following and build support for those ideas. There are people out there who will support it. However, when you're dealing with the public, you, just have some good manners and be polite. And then the rhetoric from the militant groups, all that does is escalate tensions, right? And then when these militant groups walking around carrying guns, you're just out there trying to demonstrate that you have a bigger stick and that you're welcome and violence is welcomed. That's all you're doing. It shouldn't be, and it shouldn't be that way. And then you got the white supremacists who their behavior. What is their behavior? Well, they don't go around destroying things, but what do? They're a little more sneaky, aren't they? They try to cloak their genuine racism sometimes as free speech or as heritage. I was born and raised in Atlanta, the South. There's heritage there as far as geography goes. But they undermine when they try to excuse racism with heritage or with free speech, or try to even legitimize racism because of heritage or free speech. They're undermining legitimate conservative efforts, legitimate political efforts. They're undermining that. And then they use subversive tactics online. They spread disinformation just like the left spreads disinformation. And all that does is exacerbate the divide, the mistrust. So both sides, extreme elements of both sides perpetuate cycle of resentment and then retaliation. And then as a result, there's zero progress in anything racism wise. Now, I can tell you this. I do believe this. I believe racism has been largely legislated out of the system, largely. Now, you still have small municipalities that have guys, good old boys, especially in the South, that are racist. You can't know someone's heart, so you can't know if you're hiring someone who's racist. All you can do is try to vet people as good as possible. And I'm talking about the system. I mean police, government organizations, etc. But I think, generally speaking, racism has been legislated out. I can't discriminate against you because of your color. Whether I wanted to or not, I can't do that. Now, I could be subversive about it. But then, now you're just guessing, right? Now you're just guessing. You have to take people's actions. You can't just assume. And if you're a black guy listening to this, you can't just assume every white guy is racist. And also, if you're a black guy listening to this, you can't say, because I've heard this said on several videos, that black people can't be racist because they're black. Well, yeah, I tell you what, go travel, go to Asia, even go to Europe. Hell, go to North Africa. You will see some of the most egregious racism on the planet. I can tell you this right now. Despite America's past and its very, very, very short history compared to the world of slavery and whatnot, we are leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the world in the way we've managed race relations. You may not believe it, and you may think I don't know what you think about that, but I've seen some racism. And there's slavery going on right now in the Middle East and in Africa that people conveniently forget about. And I get it. If you're an American and you're an isolationist and you're like, no, I care about America. Okay, great. But you have to acknowledge the scale. You have to acknowledge the scale. Mistrust, progress. Until we acknowledge the extremist behaviors as being invalid, we're not going to be able to move forward. And then there's a question I have. My question to anyone who's a racist, or anyone who's a statist for that matter, is who has the right to violate others? Does anyone have a right to violate someone else's individual rights? No. Nobody does. You can't legitimize it. You can't claim it. And that's to include police. We have a Fourth Amendment, which one of the problems with all this stuff is that we've drifted further and further away from the true intent of the Constitution. No one, black, white, or otherwise, has the right to violate someone else. Their personal space, their personal property, certainly not put their hands on them and violate them physically. And if you think you get a free pass because you are a certain color, you may have a season where you do get a free pass, but you don't. You don't have a free pass. You're wrong. You're the aggressor. You're wrong if you violate someone else. I've seen so many videos of white and black liberals who assault the Trump followers. You know, they might be wearing their red hat at the McDonald's, and then somebody comes up and smacks it off their heads. And young people, that's funny. You get desensitized to that. But can you imagine that? Can you imagine being in that situation? What if you were wearing a Kamala hat at McDonald's and a guy walks up and smacks it off your head, and then because you think you're a tough guy, you swing on them, and then they pull a gun and blast you? It's a very realistic thing. But the standard of behavior for the left is far looser than the standard of behavior for the right. And that's, I can back that up with video after video after video. You don't have a right to physically harm anyone. You don't have a right to destroy property. These protests that CNN touted as largely peaceful protests, where you could see the city burning in the background, that is unacceptable stuff. And that is a direct reflection of racism being used as a weapon by political entities. It's a direct result of that. You don't have a right to infringe on anyone's free speech. Extremists on both sides, black and white, left and right, have engaged in violence. The left, and there's been seasons, right? There's been seasons. The left brings up the civil rights in the 60s and 50s where there were lynchings and stuff like that going on. Not acceptable. It's unacceptable. You don't have a right to violate someone else's person. And those things were wrong. And organizationally, as a government, they took steps, however hard fought it was, they took steps due to things like Martin Luther King, people like that, doing actual peaceful protests and actually doing things that were productive. But what's some other form? You got the rioting, right? The where it's just free for all, where somebody somehow magically drops off bricks, pallets of bricks, right? And then you got things like doxing, right? Where somebody says a thing or does a thing. There's a video recently, past few days, of a white lady at a park who called a 5-year-old the N-word, and a guy videotaped her and then sort of started following her and trying to, he was video, so he's trying to get, his video to go viral. So he's trying to get that. Now, he didn't catch her on saying that, by the way, on video. But that lady, she might be racist. I don't know. But she said the N-word. That was her crime. So now, and we'll talk about it in a sec. She's unsafe in her own house. Yeah. now she's unsafe because her information's been put out, her job and all that stuff. Now, this is not GoFundMe, but there's some other thing that she's going to make a lot of money. Just like the kid who stabbed the other guy and killed him at a track meet. His was an actual crime, and he's going to get rich off of this fundraising site. And the premise is that he's unsafe, but he's not unsafe. What happened after that was the family of the guy that got killed got doxxed and swatted. Yeah. So there's do you see how the racism is, it's the imbalance there, and there shouldn't be a balance, right? There shouldn't be any racism. That lady was wrong for saying the N-word, even though that is just a form of free speech, but somehow that word alone has been somehow put off limits to whites. It's distasteful. I don't say it. I don't. But how can a word be put off limits? So it has been. But the word's not hurtful. It's not the word that's hurtful. Otherwise, black people wouldn't say it either. But I don't want to talk about that word. That's if you're the kind of guy that sits around privately and you say that and you hate black people just because they're black, you don't have you lack critical thinking skills, and you probably have a pretty low IQ as well. But the same for blacks. If you think it's okay and you rejoice in a white person because they said the N-word, you rejoice in their life being literally destroyed, you probably got a little problem too. You probably are somewhat of a sociopath. People who rejoice in other people's death and demise, you have issues that need to be addressed. But if you don't recognize it, or if you refuse to recognize it, then I guess there's nothing you can do about it, and you're just going to be that way. But if you rejoice in somebody's demise, I've seen some pretty egregious videos about the track meet kid that got stabbed and is dead simply because of he said, she said stories. So, man, don't rejoice in anyone's demise. Who has the right to violate other people? Nobody. Not white, not black, not anyone. All right, so ultimately what this comes to is a respect for individual rights. And a respect for individual rights is the foundation of society, of a civilized and just society. Respect for individual rights. That transcends race. It transcends race, sex, sexual orientation, whatever, religion, what are some other inflammatory things? Job, profession. Respect for individual rights transcends all those things. All right, now I want to move on and I want to look at one of the foundational things that is used as an excuse sometimes for racism, and then talk about its problems. The crime rates in America they're disproportionately high among black people because something like 13% of the population being black accounts for something like 37% of violent crime arrests. So that statistic, which is legitimate, and that was only up till 2020, that statistic, and whether it fluctuates left or right a little bit, is what many, many, many white people, racist people use to just explain away. Well, okay, let's get on. I'll get to it in a second. And what's and some historical context there is in the 1960s. I wasn't alive in the 1960s, but that is when the war on poverty began. The war on poverty. Now, I want you in your mind, while I'm saying war on poverty, I want you to be thinking war on drugs as well. And then the Great Society programs. Yep. The Great Society programs that were started under Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, and I say arguably by design, they created dependency from the black community, and they disrupted the family unit of the black community. And the black community was targeted, and they were targeted, well, because of racism. But this is when the racism, Democrats were the slave owners. Democrats were the South. You guys have heard the term Dixiecrats. That's the Southern Democrats who fought to maintain slavery. Now, look, there were economics and other things involved in the Civil War, but mostly economics. But slavery was, at that time, it was a part of economics. It was free labor. But then the Democrats who voted against all the civil rights acts that came along, they did not want equality in any way. They didn't want any desegregation. That was Democrats. Now, some of you are going to say, well, the party switched platforms or some garbage like that. The parties didn't switch any damn platforms. They just switched strategies. And that is all. And the Great Society was a strategy. And I'm going to say this. LBJ famously said, we will have these Negroes voting Democrat for the next 200 years. Yep. LBJ, the Democrat, said that. And that was in the early 60s. Well, mid 60s. Bad urban policies that stemmed from that right there and over-policing contributed to all these socioeconomic problems that persisted and, well, that began and then persisted on through the years in the ghettos and in the urban areas and the low-income areas and those kinds of things. That is just bad policy. It's bad liberal policies who on the surface are telling you they're doing a good thing for you. They're helping you. But when in reality, they're creating dependence and then securing your vote. That is what they're doing, and that's the strategy. Any attempt these days to simply tweak an already horrible policy, just to improve upon an already failed policy, all that does is maintain status quo. And all it does is create and maintain the ghettos. And then in the ghettos, what happens? There's a lack of opportunity and lack of resources. And then that lack, what does that do? Well, that leads to desperate people doing desperate things, which leads to criminality, criminal elements, and then sort of a ghetto culture, right? It's not black culture. It's ghetto culture that is the problem. And then that culture and those criminals, which are small elements of that, get glorified. And once that glorification hits, then it just creates a cycle. And then that cycle it's a negative cycle. It's a negative cycle. And the implications of that are that the crime disparities, they get exploited by both sides. The same statistic can get exploited by both sides to try to push agendas. The left uses those to push the systemic racism narrative in that, well, the only reason the blacks are being arrested is because they're black. Completely ignoring individual responsibility, which those policies set that up. And then the right uses it to justify harsh policing policies that are potentially violating rights, that do violate rights. I know a guy who was an undercover cop who has no problem beating the ever-loving bejesus out of a suspect. Whether he's guilty, whether he's not guilty, whether whatever. He takes pleasure in just beating the crap out of suspects. That's a violation, man. It's a violation of rights. And it's not necessary at all. Solutions to these things, they don't lie in policies that lead to dependency. They don't lie in policies that destroy the family unit, that keep black men in jail and keep a fatherless household. That is never going to solve anything. Solutions must address root causes. And racism's root cause changed over the years, I do believe. Way back in the 1400s, people came up in their little isolated spaces, wherever they were at, and other tribes and other cultures and other people were foreign and different, and they didn't view each other as human beings, right? They didn't view each other as human beings, despite what the Bible might say. And then, then you had that caused slavery. Well, one, you had Africans selling Africans to, Dutch and whoever else, who were then shipping them over to South America and North America. Well, as we grew, as we educated ourselves, as we evolved as civilized human beings and understood that men are created equal, then the root cause of racism wasn't those cultural societal differences so much as it was like things like slavery and you got in the 60s and 70s and whatnot, you had people with their feelings of superiority. And then even the poor white people felt superior to black people. And then when they saw black people doing better than them, that fueled racism. But what racism was that? That's envy, right? Wasn't that it was a black person doing better. They also envied white people doing better. So was it really racism or was it something else? And so anyway, what's another root cause? What's the root cause of the ghetto culture? It's economic opportunity and education. Famously, the liberal agendas refuse to address like actual job creation and free market job creation. And then education. Famously, the liberal version of that is the Department of Education. Jimmy Carter created Department of Education, and quite literally since its creation, the U.S. education statistics have been on a steady decline as compared to other civilized nations. Steady decline. So how do you continue to sell the benefit of the Department of Education when it year after year after year underperforms? And then, just not even underperforms, but like egregiously underperforms. So economics and education are part of the root causes that'll fix these things. Don't politicize the statistics. Just fix it. Now, I want to say this. I've said the phrase black community a lot. I think in general, people underestimate and oversimplify the term black community. The black community is every bit as diverse as the white community. People probably oversimplify white community. People probably oversimplify conservatives or liberals. Now, when we talk, and we have to sort of blanket statement these things. There's nuance to everything. There's exceptions to everything, literally. However, what I'm saying is this, is you have to understand that I couldn't possibly speak for all white people. And every activist that gets on the social medias can't possibly speak for all black people. It's just not possible. There's too many, even within a race, even within a community, there are too many different priorities and value systems for one person to speak for all. A president don't speak for all of America, even though he's the representative of America throughout the world. He don't speak for everyone. He does speak for everyone as America, but individually, you may disagree or you may hate the guy, no matter which guy it is. So understand that there's far more nuance here when it comes to solving individual problems. We're talking about big problems. We're talking about socioeconomic education problems here. And for the sake of argument, we're talking about low-income areas where crime is high and things like that. There are plenty. I don't even know. I should look this up. How many black millionaires are in America right now? I'm not. I don't even think our rank as middle class. I don't know how they're measuring the class these days based on money, but these days everybody has an opportunity. You might have to go search it out, but it's out there. Everybody has an opportunity. You don't have to resort to violence and crime to be successful. All right. Sticking with a little bit of history. In 1971, there was a book published, and this book was literally a textbook that provided strategies for what they called community organizing, but it promoted polarizing political tactics like how to choose a target, how to freeze that target, stop its progress, personalize that target, and then polarize and isolate that target. Yeah. What does that sound like? Am I setting up for an assassination hit? No, man. That was Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. And that's what they promoted. Pick an opponent, a political opponent, or a corporate guy, or whoever their chosen enemy was. Freeze, personalize, and polarize. Yeah. Saul Alinsky was not a good guy. He was a bad guy. And he, I think, took pleasure in manipulating young people into these leftist ideals. But he, like, in his book, he framed issues and like what ended up coming from that was that he basically narrowed down the American people into two classes. It wasn't black and white. It was the oppressed versus the oppressor. So you were either in the oppressed class, and this all has Marxist underpinnings all through it, or you were an oppressor. Now, I can tell you this, I don't think I'm in either class. See, I used to think I was an oppressed guy. I used to think the system was out to get me. But was it? Well, if you just, but I don't think I was, but I'm certainly not an oppressor either. There, you can't just narrow it down to those two gigantic categories. And all that did was create a sort of a victim mentality and a victim class. And then once you're in the victim class, hey, you have a free pass to do and say anything you want to. That's what they believe. And then they demonize the police, which the police do a good job of demonizing themselves, but they definitely demonize the police. And look, I do that sometimes. I have a love-hate relationship with the police and sort of policing in general. And I believe that the law takes too much liberty with citizens who are not proven to be criminals. But anyway, the police. And then they labeled anybody who dissented, any opposing opinion, as racist. Yeah, that came with Saul Alinsky, when everybody was a racist. No matter if they disagreed, they're racist. That was a strategy that Saul Alinsky laid out for activists. It says community organizing, but what he means is political activism. So if you label anybody who disagrees with you as a racist loudly, then nobody's going to want to debate the actual issues because they don't want to be labeled. Nobody wants to be called a racist. And so the consequences of these tactics over the years, all it does is alienate anybody who may be an ally, moderate. Anybody who's a moderate person, they don't want to deal with extremes. And then it entrenched the extremes on the left and right. These tactics just caused people who are already extreme-minded, just caused them to dig in deeper. And then that means what? There's compromise is impossible. So now, in their mind, it's a fight to the death. There is no compromise. There is no meat in the middle. There is no give or take. It's all or nothing. And politics, countries can't survive that way. And then the other thing it did with the oppressed versus the oppressor and the victim class is that it created that whole narrative of victimhood that undermines individual responsibility, individual accountability. That's what that does. If you walk around believing you're a victim, probably chances are you believe anything you do, violent or otherwise, is justified because you think you're a perpetual victim, and that anything you do, you claim self-defense, whether it's philosophical or physical. Yep. And that's what's happened. That's what Saul Alinsky has brought to the world. That's what Hillary Clinton touted. She was a student of Saul Alinsky. That's what Saul Alinsky brought to the world. All or nothing political discourse. All right, we're still on a little bit of history here. And I quote, "The white liberal is the worst enemy to America and the worst enemy to the black man. He is the most dangerous because he poses as a friend, but is really an enemy." Does anybody take a few minutes in your head and guess who said that? Yeah, Malcolm X said that. Malcolm X was an activist. Yep, FBI had a file on him just like they did Martin Luther King Jr. But he understood that liberal whites, he understood that there was no swap of the platform, that Democrats were just using black people as votes. And he criticized white liberals for pandering and patronizing the black community and offering, well, virtue signaling, right? That was early virtue signaling. They offered support, but it was only superficial. It was nothing tangible. You know, they would go walk with them and stuff like that, but they offered no real tangible support. But what they did do was maintain control of the black vote. And they did it without addressing any systemic issues. They claimed to, they planned to, they campaigned on doing it. But what they really did was just to create a welfare state, which we're living in. So, yeah, I encourage, you could see in the public life of Malcolm X, he kind of his evolution. Now, eventually, yeah, when he got killed by the I want to say they called it the nation, one of the black Muslims, he got killed by his own, right? By his own, not only his own race, but his own religion, black Muslims, or a Nation of Islam, I want to say they were called. But you could see his evolution of critical thinking. And eventually he got killed for it because it wasn't in lockstep with the narrative that the Democrats want to push. The liberals of the day and of today, they use black struggle for political gain. And there's just, as evidence of Barack Obama, there is no legitimate commitment to real equality or real economic or educational development. Votes. And what's the relevance of that time period is that, like I said, even today, progressive policies, they go on, they talk loud, they prioritize what you see on TV. They do, these performative measures. They go up and they'll do rallies and they'll show up and shake hands. But then there's no substance, and that's today. And then they have, the left has this sort of paternalistic approach, right? Like the black community can't do anything without them. And all that does is it takes agency and disempowers the black individual. And you guys have heard of a term called the racism of low expectations. I've literally heard videos and legitimate videos of white liberals saying that black people couldn't go and get ID cards for voting. I've also heard one where a white lady, a white liberal, argued and complained that using a large vocabulary was very racist because black people didn't understand what you're saying. Well, I got news for you. I know plenty of white people that don't have a vocabulary either. But for her to put it in that context, hell, that was more racist. That was a more racist thing to say, in my opinion. I know a guy. I'm not going to name names or how I know him, but he's a white guy, probably, I don't know, maybe 8 years older than me, and he's one of the most ignorant, uneducated people that I know. So much that it makes me angry because the internet exists. And he just chooses to be ignorant. So to say a large vocabulary is racist because black people don't understand is just one of the most racist things I've ever heard in my life. The racism of low expectations. That's what's going on in a lot of public schools. Yeah, I want to say Baltimore. I don't know. They had like a whole class, a grade level, multiple grade levels that couldn't pass basic reading and math. That's what's going on today because of bad policy. All right, that was all very negative things, man. It's been negative, and who knows what'll come from this. I was going to refrain from any controversial topics, but I felt compelled to do this one. A few things that I've seen go on. I know some guys who are like racist guys, and it bothers me. But let's start getting into some solutions. How about that? Let's get positive here for a minute. Now, these are my opinions, and I'm sort of framing some of this stuff as political, but because politics affects everything we do, and because politics exacerbates the problems, I think politics is a big accelerant for the flames. So here's what I'm going to say first. Embrace individualism, people. And that's not to say selfishness. Embrace individualism. Judge people. We all do it. We're all judgmental in some way. Judge people based on their individual actions, not as a representative of a racial group or a religious group or any other group. Judge people on their individual actions and what they do. All right? Reject collectivist ideologies. That's communism, folks. That's socialism. But the tactics of communism and socialism and Saul Alinsky and modern progressivism is to pit race against race. It's to create a oppressed and oppressor. All right? That's not good. That's bad. It only keeps the divide, which that's what the collectivists want. They want to divide. They want there to be a us against them because it creates fear. And from that fear creates obedience. And obedience eventually leads to outright tyranny. Embrace individualism and reject collectivism. Judge people on their individual actions, not the actions of their group or whatever group they claim. Learn, seek out, practice critical thinking. Learn how yourself or teach others how to evaluate evidence. And I mean primary source evidence, not second, third hand evidence, right? Primary source evidence. Question assumptions. Question the media. In fact, you should be skeptical of any media whatsoever. Somebody owns that, and that somebody who owns that has an objective or alternate plans, an agenda. So everything's propaganda. And you can frame that negatively or positively. When I put a commercial or a little video out for one of my courses, that's propaganda. I'm trying to change I'm trying to get you to want to do a thing. I'm trying to shape your mind into doing what I want you to do, which is come take one of my courses. Now, what makes it not really propaganda is that I offer value in return. But almost everything can be looked at as propaganda. Question the narratives from everything, from everyone. Question them. And that don't mean outright reject. That just means question. Question assumptions. Question what they're laying down as facts. Demand primary source knowledge. Critical thinking will change your life if you are objective, which leads us to this, the philosophy of objectivism. I love it. I think it's legitimate, and I think it's one of the only true philosophies that that advocates for individual freedom and liberty. Advocate for rational. I said individualism, not selfishness, but there is a thing called rational self-interest, and you need to advocate rational self-interests. Every individual should do what is best for them as long as it doesn't infringe on someone else. If you are your best self, you will be the best for the community or for your friends and family. Advocate for rational self-interest. Uphold objective, merit-based standards. Objective standards, for one. Hold black people and white people to the same standard, no matter what, whether it's job, behavior, whatever. Sports. Sports is dominated by black people. All sports, just about, with the exception of probably hockey. Guess what? You don't get any white players just because they're white, right? They have to perform. That's it. So they gotta you do the work. If you want to be on the starting team, do the work. Same holds across corporate America. Same holds across standards of behavior out in society. Merit-based, objective standards, not race-based policies based on affirmative action or racial quotas, or what's the hot one these days? Diversity, equality, and inclusion, or something like that. And here's what I want to say about that. I think 2 weekends ago, the 2025 Best Ranger competition was held. And that's 3 days of gruesome combat, physical tasks at a high level. And out of however many teams that start that, there's usually, an attrition rate of teams is probably 50% or higher. For the first time in history, a female, and it happened to be a black female, and her name was Lieutenant Gabrielle White, not only competed in the Best Ranger competition, but her and her teammate finished, I want to say like 14 out of probably 100 teams that started, and probably 30 or 40 that finished. Her and her teammate finished like 14th. There was no DEI there, folks. I can tell you this. I know the Army had a lot of weird policies and things like that. I can tell you this. DEI has no place and does not affect the Best Ranger competition. You have to put out, and you have to put out for 3 days nonstop. And there are grown men, black and white, that do not finish that year after year. And this young Lieutenant Gabrielle White not only finished, but finished at a respectable level. She didn't need DEI to do that. She performed on her own merit. Keep that in mind. It can be done. The racism of low expectations, you didn't see that there. She was expected to do everything her white male partner did, and at a level that, right, and at his level. Or possibly he had to do things at her level. Maybe she might have been better at some of those tasks than him. Who knows? So, uphold objective standards for everyone. Standards of behavior, standards of performance, standards of output as far as work goes. You get no free pass for being anything other than a hard worker. And then what else can we do? Talk to other people, promote moderate dialogue. You can have an extreme position and still have a rational conversation about it. Promote that. Promote calm political discourse. That'll help ease the tensions on racism right there. And then a big one. What else can we do to kind of help ease the flames of racism in the modern day? Support legitimate education reforms. Now, to me, that means school of choice. That means Department of Education going away. That means community-based education. That means the money follows the child. That means Montessori schools, charter schools. That means being competitive in the education market so that you have teachers who aren't just riding out tenure, but actually give a crap about their performance. To me, that's what education reform means. And then you can have education that actually empowers individuals with unique skill sets and stuff like that, not just your standardized factory-based education. Not just your standardized factory-based education, which is what the Department of Defense churns out. Department of Education churns out. And this also reduces dependency on the federal government for your school funding or any of those things. And then, right, you don't get politics in school. You don't get these activist teachers who are secretly trying to push agendas in the classroom, because those teachers can be fired or those teachers can be reprimanded. And if you come to work for our school system, this is what our ethos is, and this is what you will teach, or you can beat feet. And then the community has more say in what that school does and how they do business. And I think that's more important. The federal government doesn't need say in what your local school does. And that's a very libertarian ideal. And that's what I'm going to get into next here. I know I'm going long, but libertarian ideals, whether you're a libertarian or not, but some of the functional policies or ideals will help. And this is it. And these are my final words of encouragement, things that'll help us. All right. Embrace strong individualism. All right. I said that already. Judge people by their actions and not their race or their sex. But we're talking about race right now. Maintain accountability, individual accountability for everyone, no matter if they're an immigrant, no matter if they're black, white, brown, blue. Individual accountability and responsibility. You take responsibility for your own actions and hold people responsible for their actions, and reject victimhood and lack of accountability. And then pursue self-determination. You as an individual can find your path. You build your own path through education, work, and personal growth. You chase down what you desire and build your priorities around that. Don't build it around what you're being told by some political group or that your tribe, your group expects you to do this, so you do that. No, don't do that. I think I hear that a lot from sort of inner city ghetto type situations where people are pulled into a certain lifestyle and they can't get out. And that's true. And that's true. That's a common narrative amongst gangsters. They get pulled in at a young age and they just can't get out. Pursue self-determination, right? If we use good policy to economic policy and educational policy, these ghettos will go away, and you won't have that same dynamic. Respect personal property rights. Respect your own property, and even if you don't own that property, treat it as if it's your own and take care of it. Respect that other people have earned their property, and you should treat it with respect. People should treat your property with respect. That's your own personal self. That's your physical things you own. That's your home, your car, all those things. Your personal space, even. Protect what you earn and respect what others own. I'm sure, with the exception of a few rich people out there, very rich, people, everybody's had to earn what they have. I've had to earn anything that I have. I promise you, I wasn't a trust fund baby. I didn't have an inheritance. All right. Everybody can say the same thing just about. Protect what you earn and respect what other people have earned. Maintain and respect other people's rights. Live and let live. Place a high value on free speech, and that includes speech that you don't like. Freedom of association. People can hang around, they can do business, they can protest with anyone they want to protest. Freedom of association. And then individual liberty. Respect other people's liberty. Everybody has the same rights. Respect those. And respect them for yourself as well. Expect them amongst yourself, or expect it of yourself. Put that expectation on other people for you, and then you live that expectation against other people. And then practice good manners, people. I say this all the time. Just have good manners. That's it. Just out in public. Treat others with a basic human respect. You don't have to kiss anyone's ass. But please and thank you is not a capitulation of superiority or inferiority, right? Just have a little respect amongst general public. Even when you disagree, don't let it turn into an emotional friggin' event. Respectfully agree to disagree. Practice good manners. I think that's in short order today. I don't even know if that's a part of kids' schooling today. If you live these principles that I just laid out, these are very libertarian-esque principles, but they're also very human principles. Nothing's groundbreaking extreme there. If you live these principles, you can dismantle the illness of racism, at least in your circle of friends. You can get rid of this identity politics that we've been doing for the past 20 years. And then we can usher in a modern society where character and merit determine your success, right? Good character and being of value to yourself and others will define your success. Be honest with yourself, respect other people, and have good manners. There you go. That's what I had to say today, folks. I don't think anything was very inflammatory. It may have been, and you may have a little issue with some of the things. If you do, by all means, reach out. djutopodcast.com. Go in there and leave me a message and tell me what you think. Or if you got a different spin on what I've laid out, give it to me. I'll look over it and I'll address it. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys for listening. Please spread the word. Please go on and like rate the podcast and all that, whatever it is that makes it get good algorithm stuff. Yeah, please go on and do all those things. Like, share, follow, rate, leave me a review even. And as always, reach out. If you need help, reach out. If you need anything within my capacity, I will help you with it. All right. So thank you, folks. Be good. Talk to you next month. I love you guys.